Lesson 8.7 is solving on a quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0, when the number in front of x squared is not just 1, it's actually a different number. Okay, so before we were just looking at equations that had a as 1. Okay, so we're going to learn how to factor them and then also to solve them. And the only vocabulary for this section is prime polynomial. Okay, so in this case, what we want to do is we want to rewrite this equation so that it's 4 terms so that we can factor it by grouping. So what we're going to do is we're going to use something called the AC method. So what we want to do is we want to take our A, which is always the number in front of x squared, and our C, which is always the one without a variable. Okay, and we want to do A times C, and then we want to look at it as which ways we can factor it. So in our case here, we have 5 and 6 as our A and our C. So I'm going to do A times C, which is going to be 30. Now, instead of wanting to multiply to 6 like we were doing in the last section, we want to be able to multiply to 30. And we still want to add to the middle number. So we still want to add to negative 13. Okay, so because we're multiplying to a positive number and adding to a negative number, we know we want both of our numbers to be negative. So I can have negative 2 and a negative 15, but that's going to add to negative 17. So that's not what we're looking for. So we can try negative 3 and negative 10. They multiply to positive 30, and they do add to negative 13. So now, instead of writing minus 13x, we want to rewrite this as minus 10x and minus 3x. And now I have 4 terms. So now I can factor it by grouping. So I grouped my first 2 together and my second 2 together. So looking at the first 2, I have 5 and x common to both. So I pull out 5x and I'm left with x minus 2. In the other one, I have negative 3 that I want to pull out so that I can get this one here to be positive and this one negative. So I know I want to do the opposite sign, and they both are divisible by 3. So I pull out negative 3 and I get x minus 2. So now I have x minus 2 common to both of those terms. I pull it out and I'm left with 5x minus 3. Okay, now this is the factored form. So if I were to multiply this out, I would get back to the original equation. Okay, so using the AC method, one important thing is that we always want to start by looking to see if there's any common denominator. Remember our GCF, that's always the first step to factoring. So looking at this, there's nothing common to all of them. They're not all divisible by one number. So I go on and I go back to the other method. So I go A times C. So 5 times 10 is going to be 50. So I want to multiply to A times C, which is 50, and I still want to add to my middle number B. So I still want to add to 27. Okay, so I'm looking for numbers that multiply to 50 and add to 27. So 1 and 50, they're both positive, so all of our numbers are going to be positive. We get 51, so that's not it. I can do 2 and 25, and then I do get 27. So in this case, our numbers that we're looking for to replace B is going to be 2 and 25. So we can rewrite this equation as 5x squared plus 25x plus 2x plus 10. Now, we haven't changed anything because 5x and 2x, 25x and 2x still add to 27x, so nothing has changed. So now I can have 4 terms I can factor by grouping. So looking at the first 2, they're both divisible by 5x. And what I have left here is x plus 5. Now looking at the second 2 terms, 2x and 10, they both are divisible by 2. So we do plus 2 times x plus 5. Now I have x plus 5 to common to both. If I pull out x plus 5, I'm left with 5x plus 2. And that's the factored form. And I'm done. Okay, so this one, remember, we always want to pull out the GCF first. So we're looking to see if there's the greatest common factor. So 4, 24, and 32. They're all divisible by 4. So my first step is always going to be pull out greatest common factor. So if I pull out 4, I'm left with x squared plus 6x plus 8. Now, I don't have to do factor by grouping or by the AC method because now I'm left in here with a 1 in front of x squared, and I can do what we were doing in the last section. So I want to find a number where I multiply to 8 and add to 6. So I can say 4 and 2. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 plus 2 is 6. So we always want to add to the middle number and multiply to the last one. Okay, and they're both going to be positive. And then this is going to be our factored final answer. Okay, so you guys try these. Okay, example 2. So remember, we still want to look and see if there's a greatest common factor. That's always our first step. In this case, there's not. So we're going to do our AC method. So I'm going to do A times C. 3 times 24 is 72. So I want to multiply to 72, and I still want to add to my middle number, which is now negative 22. So in this case, where we want to add to a negative number and multiply to a positive, we're going to have two negative numbers, right? So a negative times a negative will give us a positive, and then a negative plus a negative will still be negative, okay? So we're looking for factors of 72. So I can say 2 and 36, negative 2 and negative 36, right? So it's going to be negative 38, which is not 22, so we want to keep looking. So if I do 72 is also divisible by 3, so I can say negative 3 and negative 24. If I add those, I get negative 27, which is still not 22. So we keep going. If I do 72 is also divisible by 4, so negative 4 and negative 18. When I add those, I do get negative 22. So my choices that I'm going with are negative 4 and negative 18. So I'm rewriting this. Instead of putting negative 22, I'm going to do minus 4x and minus 18x, and then plus 3. So I just replaced this with these. I haven't changed it because negative 4 and negative 18 still add to negative 22. Okay, so now I want to factor this by grouping. Okay, so looking at the first two, I have 4x that I can pull out, and I'm left with 6x minus 1. Okay, and then I look at the next one. I want to get 6x here, and then minus 1. So here, I want to pull out a negative so that I can make this one positive and this one negative. So I'm going to pull out a negative, and between 18 and 3, they're both divisible by 3. So if I pull out a negative 3, I'm left with a positive 6 minus 1. And now common to both of these, I have 6x minus 1, and I'm left with 4x and minus 3. And now this is our factored form. Okay, number 3, determine whether a polynomial is prime. Okay, so we want to try and factor this if it's possible. And there might be cases where we can't find that perfect combination that give us what we're looking for. So if we're using our AC method, well, first we're going to look to see if there's anything we can pull out. Between 3, 7, and 5, we can't because they're all prime numbers. So I'm going to do my AC method. So 3 times negative 15, 3 times negative 5 is going to be negative 15. So I want to multiply to negative 15, and I want to add to 7. Okay, so we're adding to a positive number and multiplying to a negative number. So to get a negative number, we're going to have one positive and one negative. But since what we're adding to is positive, the bigger of the two is going to be the positive. Okay, so I'm looking at factors of 15. I can say 15 and negative 1, and that's going to be 14, which is not right. We can say 5 and negative 3, which gives us 2. And I can't think of any more combinations that get us to 15. So because none of those added to what we're looking for, this is not factorable. So we say that it's prime. Okay? Okay, last example. Mr. Nugent, science class, built a model rocket for a competition. When they launched their rocket outside the classroom, the rocket cleared the top of a 60-foot high pole and then landed in a nearby tree. If the launch pad was 2 feet above the ground and the initial velocity of the rocket was 64 feet per second, the rocket landed 30 feet above the ground. How long was the rocket in flight? Use the equation h equals negative 16t plus vt plus h0. Okay, so they tell us what a lot of the information was. So V represents the speed. So if it was Blanche, did they tell us the speed? The velocity of the rocket was 64 feet per second. So we're just going to fill in our equation with 64. We're trying to find t, so I can't replace t. Okay, and they say that the initial height, right, h0, when you have a 0 there, it means the initial. So they say the initial height was 2 feet above the ground. So we're going to put in 2 for h0. And the final thing that we're looking for is they want to know how long it was in flight. So we want to know our final height is going to be when it hits the ground, which is going to be 0. So we're going to solve this for t. So remember when we're solving something, we get everything on one side equal to 0. So we already have 0 on one side. So now this part over here is what I want to factor. So I look to see if there's anything I could pull out. So all of these are divisible by 2. So first thing I want to do is pull out a 2. I'm actually going to pull out a -2 because it's many times helpful to have the first term positive. So if I pull out a -2, I'm left with 8t squared minus 32t and then minus 1. Okay, so now I want to factor this part in here. I still don't have a 1 in front of t squared, so I have to use the AC method. So I'm going to do 8 times -1, and I want to multiply to a -8, and I want to add to a -32. So I'm going to look and see what combinations I can get. So multiply to 8, it could be hang on one second. Okay, I missed the part where it says 30 feet above the ground. So instead of this being 0, that should have been 30. So in order to get this to be 0, I would want to do -30 from both sides. So now, instead of this being that, this would have been over here. 0 equals -16t plus 64t and then minus 28. Okay, so here I still want to get it equal to 0, or I want to get rid of any common terms. So all of these now are divisible by 4. So if I pull out a -4, I'm going to get -4, it's going to become 4t squared minus 4t squared minus 16t, and then minus plus 7. Okay, so now I want to factor this part here. So I'm going to do my AC method. Now I want to multiply to a -28 and add to a -16. Okay, so I can do, I want to have one positive and one negative. So I can do 14, 2. Okay, sorry. It's 4 times negative, so it's positive 16. So it means they're both going to be positive or negative, and when I do this, I do get -16. So it's going to replace this with -14t minus 2t and plus 7, and then 4t squared. Okay, and then I factor this by pulling out common terms, and then I set each of those terms after I factor it equal to 0. So I'm going to factor it really quick. So once you have it factored, you can check my work. You set each part equal to 0. So I want to do 2t minus 7 equals 0 and 2t minus 1 equals 0. And then I solve both of them. So I'm going to get here t equals 7 over 2. And here I'm going to get t equals 1/2. And then you would go through and say that these are going to be the 2 points, 2 times that it could be, but one of them makes more sense than the other. I think we're going to find that it's going to be this one. Okay, so you guys try this last one.